Now we'll be taking a quick look at the material editor. So the first thing I'm going to do is load in a standard terrain, and I'm going to zoom out on our camera just a little, and then I'm going to double click on our preview to pull up our material editor. Now if it currently looks like this, that means you have the basic material editor up, and we want to switch over to the advanced material editor. Because most of the major features are available within the advanced material editor, and actually using the basic material editor, you won't be able to achieve the kind of results and effects that you want uh, with reflections and being able to edit more specific features. So the advanced material editor is definitely the way to go. If we look at the top, we will see that we have type. And what this allows us to do is change between a simple material, a mixed material, which allows us to combine two other materials together, and also a volumetric material, which right now, because I have a mixed material, I can't change to that, but I'm going to go ahead and change to volumetric. And now we have a volumetric material, which means we can create smoke and clouds and things like that. And we also have our ecosystem. Now, depending on what layers you have, certain ones can only be turned on. So now right now I have this default. Well, I could change that to an ecosystem, which ends up adding another layer where we have our ecosystem layer and then our underlying material, which will be the major base of our terrain texture underneath our ecosystem. We can also add multiple layers, so I can add a new layer. And then what this is going to automatically do is pull up our material chooser, and I'm just going to select the default, which is located under rocks. But now we can change this as well. I could change this to a mixed material, and now you see we have even more layers available. And then within this, if we look on the right, we'll see that we have these almost little pen thing. What we could do is click on this, and we could see a color come up. Well, what this is actually doing is defining, and it's going to give us a preview of what the material is going to look like. The best way to really show that is to actually load in a material that's already been made. So I'm just going to load in a rock material. I'm going to grab our complex rock and click OK, just because this is a very good mixed material. And now we can see our preview render of this material in our main camera view, thumb preview. I'm going to double click and go back into our material editor, and now we can see all the different layers that make up this material. Well, if we want to be very specific about it and actually see exactly what material is affecting this object in certain areas, what we can do is click on these objects, and now you can see we have a color right here, and I can right mouse click and change that to a green. And now if we render, we can see that green show up. And that's telling us exactly what material or where the placement of that material is on our surface. So we can do this with the other ones as well. Click on that, and now we have a dark blue. So if I click on our preview to update it, we can see that blue come in right there with our green. So it's a very good way of breaking down materials and taking a look at them. And then if we want to change them back, all I gotta do is click on them again, and they'll return back to their original state. And now we're going to take a look at some of the more individual options we have for each of these materials. So I'm going to go ahead and select on this number 2, and we can see we have the color and alpha, which is going to give us that channel, and this is being controlled currently by a gradient map. We can also adjust the overall color, which will, if we change this to a blue, change this overall surface to a blue, but it will not edit any of our color maps or any of that. It's just a color correction. So we could right mouse click on this and either edit our color map, we could copy our color map, and we could also load in other color maps that are already saved within View. So we could do solid colors, gradients, and then those, of course, are being controlled by other parts in the scene to give it that little bit of variation. We also have our bump map, which right now is being controlled by a function within the function editor. And we can also edit a filter for this and select displacement mapping. Now, bump mapping is the illusion of depth within a surface. As you can see right now, we have sort of the illusion of depth within this material. Now, displacement mapping will actually turn this into real geometry, and that's all based on our depth. If we increase our depth, then our render, should be able to see the preview, will go up, and our displacement map will be a little bit deeper, and it will actually change the geometry for the object and not just create the illusion of changed geometry. And now we'll move on to the Highlights tab, which will allow us to change the highlight color. So I'll just go ahead and do that right now. Change that to sort of a blue, and now we can see the highlight is more of a bluish tint. We can also adjust how bright that highlight is, if it's shiny or if it's dull. And then, of course, if we want to manipulate our highlight so it's a little bit of a different shape and it's a little more skewed, and then we can also select whether or not we like variable highlights. Will allow us to change this based on a function. To do that really easily, I could just copy our function from our bump map and paste it onto our highlight function. And what we could also do is even load in functions that are already pre-saved. If you don't want to be diving around within the function editor, if you're not familiar with it completely up to be working in it, you can still load in a lot of these presets. And then we're going to go to our transparency tab, which will allow us to, of course, adjust our transparency, whether or not we have a blurred transparency, and our refraction index. Refraction index, this is based entirely on actual scientific numbers. So in other words, 1.5 is going to be glass, 1.33 will be water, and it is the real refraction index numbers. So you can go online and look for a refraction index depending on what sort of transparent object you are creating, and that way you can be entirely accurate about it. What we can also do is make this fuzzy on the edges, and we can adjust the overall fuzziness, and we even have a fading out. This is very useful with water. We can have clear or murky, but of course it works with any of our surfaces. What we also have here is dispersion. Now dispersion is not going to work right now until we turn on our compute physically accurate caustics within our rendering options. I'm going to click OK. And just change tabs really quick, and now we can see we have enabled dispersion. And what dispersion will allow us to do is create sort of a rainbow effect with transparent objects, like if we create a diamond or glass, and it'll give us that nice little rainbow on the ground. Then we also have our reflections, so we can do global reflections and blurred reflections, and then we have a few other options that are also available, just exactly the same as some of our other tabs. And now we have translucency, which is enable subsurface scattering. And if you're not familiar with subsurface scattering, it is an object that is more like candle, where we have candle wax, where it would be a very translucent surface where light will glow through it, lampshade, anything like that, marble, and we can create some very, very neat looking effects with subsurface scattering. So we can enable that on if we want. We can adjust our depth, how much we want our absorption, our balance, refraction index. And once you have this translucency turned on, the refraction index under transparency is grayed out. And that's because it's being controlled now by our subsurface scattering. And now we're going to go over to our effects tab, and you can see we have a lot more options. We can adjust the diffusion of our object, the ambience, and of course the luminance, the contrast, and just all of these different options. We also have color reflected light for if you're working with metallic surfaces, color transmitted light, which works a little bit better with translucent or transparent objects. And then we have glowing material, where we can create a nice glow effect around our object. And global transformations, which will allow us to create turbulence and rotation and just lots of different settings for each of our surfaces. And there's just a few more things I want to show you. One thing is the name up here. We can change the layer name for each of our surfaces. Right now we have this set to 2, and we have its name up here. Well, I could go ahead and change this, and I'll just type out 2, and we can see that that changes within our layer panel right here. What we also have is our mapping options, which we have majorly world and object. And what this is our coordinate system for our object. In other words, is our material linked to our object and how we manipulate it, or is it linked to the world? In other words, the easiest way to explain it is if we have a material mapped to terrain and we resize the terrain, will the material resize with the terrain, or will it stay the same size and the terrain will just become larger and the material will adjust to it? World will allow us to resize our terrain, and the material will stay exactly the same size and will move around within the sizing of that terrain. An object will scale the material with our object as we manipulate it. And of course we have standard, cylindrical, spherical, and parametric. Most of the default settings on this are usually fine, but as you can see, we do have very specific options. So if you're working with a cylindrical object, then of course select cylindrical. If you're working with a spherical object, of course select spherical. So it's pretty straightforward as far as that goes. We also have a couple other effects on top. We have the ability to change whether or not we want this to be a one-sided object, If you want to have anti-aliasing on for it, we can of course turn that off. Cast shadows, receive shadows, only shadows. And most of the stuff's pretty straightforward.